The living wage is an hourly wage rate calculated to take into consideration the costs of housing, transport, food and basic essentials for the worker and his or her family. We're in Waterloo, central London, to speak to Theologian Dr Anna Rowlands about Catholic social teaching and the living wage.
Catholic social teaching is a body of public letters that the popes began to write to the church, but not just to the church, to the whole of the international community from 1891 onwards. And there have been 12 such letters stretching from 1891, when Rerum Novarum, meaning on new things, was written, right up to 2009, when Pope Benedict commented on the international financial crisis that we're now in. So that body of literature seeks to comment on politics, on economics, and on our social relationships. Sometimes communicating why the Church has Catholic social teaching can be complicated and fraught with difficulties. We live in a time when most people accept that religion and politics should be by and large separate. But Catholic social teaching is saying something which is quite different. What it's saying is the Church shouldn't run politics, it shouldn't run economic life. Of course, that's the job of people who work in those areas, that's their vocation, if you like, and the Church doesn't wish to interfere with that. But what it does say is that there is a way in which knowing who Jesus Christ is and what he brings to us changes the way we think about the purpose of politics, the purpose of economic life, and it can inspire us to think differently and creatively about our relationships as an employer, our relationships as an MP, our relationships when we work in our everyday working environments. And so really it's because of who Jesus is that the Church has social teaching. Jesus comes, we understand, to affect every area of our social lives, not just what happens to us for 2 hours on a Sunday morning. He's there to transform all aspects of our embodied experience. And our workplaces are probably the predominant place where we spend now most of our time. Well, the living wage in Catholic social teaching is a wage which offers a just price for the work you do, but also which allows you to feed yourself, to clothe yourself, to provide housing for you and for your family. So the living wage is a family wage in Catholic social teaching. It's there to support not just the worker, but the worker's family. And the worker is not necessarily only the male in the household. Equal pay for equal work is a key principle of the living wage. But it isn't just about basic subsistence, because Catholic social teaching has a much wider view of the living wage. The living wage is not just about feeding yourself and clothing yourself, it's about education. It's about participation in the social reality, the social life around us. Now that may seem as if it's a luxury, but Catholic teaching says that basic ways to participate in the world around you is core to human well-being, core to human flourishing. It's not an additional luxury. And that's partly because a Catholic understanding of poverty is that it breeds isolation. We're not made for isolation as human beings. As human beings, we're created in the image of God for relationship with each other. And the way that our wages, the money that we earn for our work, should work for us is to enable our social participation, not just our bare survival. When the popes began to write these extraordinary letters to the whole world in 1891, one of the reasons that they decided they needed to reawaken Christian teaching on social realities was because they saw the impact that working in a wage economy was having on families. And one of the things they wanted to do was ask how economics could be made to serve people rather than people to serve markets. And one of the core things they chose to focus on was the idea of a just price, a just wage, or what we now tend to call a living wage. Now, this thinking was both very new and also very old. It was old in the sense that going right back to the medieval period, and particularly to the work of the famous theologian Thomas Aquinas, theologians had been wrestling with the question, what would be a just price to pay somebody for the work that they do? And a just wage or a just price was seen to be something which both paid you for the costs of what you were producing, but also enabled you to have a decent standard of living. Now, why would that matter? Well, it mattered to the theologians, and it mattered in 1891 to Pope Leo XIII when he wrote Rerum Novarum, because of human dignity, the basic right to life. So the Church has taught that a living wage is basically a right to life. It's a gateway to the right to a family life. It's a gateway to basic practices of human dignity. So the popes have written at length in the encyclicals on the conditions for a living wage, the importance of government as well as businesses paying a living wage. The encyclical tradition may feel as if it's coming to us from a 19th century world and then has been added to by these popes, but I think there's real practical relevance of these questions in the ordinary way we live our lives now. I've been involved in really interesting work for the living wage alongside particularly young people from Catholic schools. These are particularly young people whose parents might be employed by a school or a local council. They might be employed as a cleaner in a big bank or a government department. And the reality is that their parents find that they cannot afford not just basic subsistence, but time with their families, that they have to make very compromised choices about the way that they live their lives. And it's their children who are speaking publicly about their experience of living in households without a living wage. I've seen incredibly courageous young people from Catholic schools standing up and challenging the system of employment practices which their parents face. I've seen them stand in front of leaders of the city council and local councillors. I've seen them challenge even the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Prime Minister to say, listen what it's like for my parents. For my parents, they are desperate to spend more time talking with me at home. They want to spend time helping me with my homework. But my mum has 3 jobs. She works for 50 hours a week. She takes 3 forms of public transport to get to work because she can't afford any other way of getting there. That means on parents' evening, there's no one to hear about my progress in school. At home, there's no one to help me with my homework. A living wage is a right to a family life. And in public, they're talking about what that means in 21st century Britain. And what's more, when these young people that I have witnessed stand up and speak truth to power in this way, people listen, because it's the impact of this reality on the shaping of our communities which changes hearts and minds. Firstly, because we need to practice what we preach. We need to put this into operation so that we're teaching by example. But the second reason is actually for a sound economic one, which is that the living wage makes economic sense. The living wage produces a level of commitment and creativity in work. It produces loyalty amongst workers to those for whom they work. And it produces a stable base for a business, for a community organisation, for an institution. So the living wage is something which is both morally what we ought to do, but actually the point about the living wage and the reason why it's right from a Catholic perspective is that it makes economic sense too. Human dignity and economics are not in the end opposites of each other. They are, in fact, in very deep relationship.